Howdy folks. Today we're going to talk about the concept of a singleton. A singleton is essentially a class that you create exactly one instance of it and never create another instance again. So let's talk about why these might be useful and how we create one. Let's get into it. So to start, let's see how to actually create a singleton. So let's say, that might be spelled correctly. Let's say we have a class, okay? And it's some class. We have a constructor, this.data. We have some data, and maybe we have a method. Oh, actually, I don't need to put public on it. Do thing. This is not a very well orchestrated class, but it'll be useful enough to tell us what we're doing. So normally, if I want to make use of this, right, I could say module to export foo, and then in my main class here, my server, I could foo equals require. Actually, that is wrong because I didn't export a function. And I could say foo, right, and then inst.doThing. You know what? Let's make this a little bit more interesting. Data push island, and then we'll actually just console log this. That'll give us something that actually, does something. Okay, so now we say thing, add 5, and we kind of expect that to add 5 and give us the array containing 5. And there we go. We have an empty array and array containing 5. Not very useful, but kind of an interesting example. So let's say that for whatever reason, we only ever want there to be one instance of foo. Maybe foo actually needs to make a connection to a database. Maybe foo needs to add something really, really complicated into memory that we don't want to happen multiple times. A very common use case of this is something that is almost like a utility class. Now, utility classes themselves are a little sketch, and a lot of them you can actually do as static classes, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But essentially, I don't want people to be able to do this. New foo, no bueno, not a good thing, not allowing it. So first of all, let's talk about how do we stop that? Well, for one, the most common way is instead of exporting foo, we actually do this here, and we export it like that. Okay, so now this is actually creating a new instance. This class is private. It's a private class to the singleton file. It's nothing can access it. And now we're just exporting the instance. So now in this case, it looks kind of like this. Same thing. One reason this can actually be useful is, let's say I have a couple other files that want this. Like maybe I have another file here. And I've got a function that takes in a specific number, and it's going to add that number times 2. Okay. I do not know why it doesn't respect module here. Okay, so now if I come in here and I say, all right, I've got my file 2. And I'm going to say, okay, do thing add, and then add 2. I run that. Oh, not a number because I didn't actually put in a number in there. That's very reasonable. Now you can see I have this same original array, but now even though add 2 is in file 2, it's got the same instance, right? So imagine if this was foo. So if we go back to this being exports equals foo. Okay, and we got to comment these out because they don't work otherwise. And I come in here. Where am I going to get my instance from? I can say foo. Okay, and then in server also. But if I run this, you can see I still just get that 5. That's because now instance is server.js, but then this is its own instance in file 2. So because I've had to create a new instance of the class, it doesn't share that state. On the other hand, if I am just using the instance from Singleton, it's the same instance, which means it's going to keep its state. And so that's one of the things that can be really helpful with singletons. The other way you can do this is that if you actually make a private constructor, and you can see JavaScript has a problem with this, and you have something like this, so then I could actually have as a static here, and then if not foo.int if you have a programming language that actually supports private constructors and actually private static variables, then this is actually completely reasonable because your constructor now cannot be called. If it's private, it can't be called from outside the class. And then you just have an actual little instance method on here that just says, okay, I'm keeping a static variable of my instance. If it doesn't exist, then I'm going to create it. Otherwise, I'm going to return it. That ensures that you can actually export your class like normal, which might be useful because maybe you do actually have some static methods on the class you still want to use, but you can still get an instance. And in that case, you would actually have something like this. So you might see this pattern as well. JavaScript does not support that, as you can see, because I could do it, right? I could actually put this in here and this would be totally fine. The problem is neither of these are private. And the whole point of doing a singleton is I don't want people to be able to access and make their own classes or their own instances. And if you do something like this and you just have it hooked in like that, it makes it it gives people the possibility. If you give people the possibility, they're going to do it. So generally, that's kind of the idea behind a singleton. So as you can see, one of the reasons and why we would care about this, one of the reasons you could see was it's the same instance, which means it has the same memory hooked into it. So across multiple files, classes, and a lot of other languages actually do work the same way as JavaScript with those exports, where if I export an instance here, it's going to be the same one across all that stuff. Another thing is that things like this, instances like this, can actually extend classes, which, especially in JavaScript, extending and inheritance can be a little wonky. So sometimes an instance is a little better with that. Another thing that's useful with this is, let's say I actually have a function, some action, some object, and this I can actually call object thing, right? Oh my God. 5 is not a valid thing. Let's actually just put add. Maybe you have a wrapper for this, right? Now I can actually call this some action. I can pass instance into it. Okay, I can't do this with a class. If I'm just taking foo, I can't pass foo into that because that's a class. Classes cannot, in JavaScript and most other languages, can't be passed directly into functions like that. There are a lot of languages, Java, for instance, that do let you pass in a class, but it's got some limitations on it, and it's actually kind of difficult to call a method on that class if it's just been passed in as a class. It's doable, but it's a little harder. So in this case also, I can just pass my instance in, and because it is an instance of something, it can be treated just like an instance of something. And I can call methods on it, I can access its methods, things like that. It also helps a little bit with dependency injection, which is something that if you're not familiar with, I might do a video on that, because it's a really interesting thing. But working with instances allows you to manipulate them in specific ways, mocking, stuff like that. That is a little bit harder to do with a static class. And in fact, sometimes, depending on your setup, if it's a little convoluted, can actually break a lot of stuff. So when you're testing, working with something like this can be really easy as well. So yeah, that's a singleton. In conclusion, singletons have only a single, have only a single instance. That's where the singleton comes from. That instance is either you get it via an initializer on the actual class, that's a static initializer, or you just create that new instance and that's what gets exported from your module instead of the actual class. And then you can just use it anywhere that you need that instance to be. You just import it, it persists across files, and can be passed around like a normal instance. And in various languages, sometimes gets around with weird things with inheritance. Hope this is helpful. I'll see y'all next time.